Attention, please. The 7:45 evening service to Hartford is now standing at Platform 2 and will depart shortly. Passengers are kindly requested to board at this time. This train will be calling at Meriden, Berlin, and Hartford. Thank you for traveling with us this evening. Attention, please. The 7:45 evening service to Hartford is now standing at Platform 2 and will depart shortly.
Attention passengers. The 7:45 p.m. service to Hartford is now arriving on Platform 2. This train will call at Meriden, Berlin, and Hartford. Please stand clear of the platform edge and allow passengers to exit before boarding.
The short film you just watched was created in Agent 1 by NVIDIA, an AI filmmaking agent that understands your creative vision, retains context across your project, and helps bring it to life through direction rather than prompting. Let me walk you through the process. I already have the treatment document, and I'm importing it into Agent 1. For filmmakers, a treatment is essentially the creative blueprint of a project. My treatment document defines the core narrative and emotional themes of the story, along with a Wong Kar-wai-inspired visual philosophy that establishes the mood, lighting, atmosphere, and overall cinematic language. It also details the characters, their personalities and motivations, the station environment, camera movement, lens choices, framing rules, color palette, and visual constraints as well as sound design. Essentially, everything needed to communicate the creative vision of the film before a single scene is generated. By training Agent 1 on this treatment, it can carry that context throughout the project, so I don't have to repeatedly explain the same creative decisions across every scene. Also, I briefly mentioned what I am trying to create, a melancholic late 1980s short film called The Announcement. The uploaded treatment note should be used as the primary creative reference and followed consistently throughout the project. Then I gave the project a name. And a name for the agent. Director sounds good. Once the treatment is uploaded, Agent 1 starts analyzing and organizing the information into project context. It extracts the characters, locations, visual rules, narrative structure, and creative direction, then confirms what has been understood and stored. What stood out to me is that it didn't immediately start generating scenes. It first responded to the story itself, describing it as a quiet and emotional piece, and even agreed that Wong Kar-wai's emotional grammar is the right instinct here. That felt less like a tool processing instructions and more like a creative collaborator understanding the intent behind the film. It initially suggested a 5-scene structure based on the treatment. But after I mentioned that the final film would only be around 1 minute long, Agent 1 reworked the narrative into 3 cinematic beats: the ritual, the loss, and the archive, while finding ways to preserve the emotional arc of the story. It also suggested weaving the seasonal progression into the first beat rather than dedicating a separate scene to it. Beyond the story structure, it asked filmmaker-focused questions about aspect ratio, runtime, music, and voice design before moving forward. What impressed me most is that Agent 1 wasn't simply summarizing the treatment. It was using the information to build a production plan, filling in details that weren't explicitly written in the storyline, and making creative recommendations based on the context it had learned. More importantly, that context now becomes part of the project memory, allowing the characters, visual language, environments, and creative decisions to carry consistently throughout the filmmaking process. The agent has started generating the station platform, where the story will pan out, following the aesthetics. No need to specify or write a prompt again. It includes the environment description, the empty wooden bench, speaker, lighting, and rain descriptions. Now, the rendered image looks okay, but the placement of the speaker looked odd. Maybe it should be on a structure. So I asked the agent to reevaluate and give me 4 variations in a single go. So, Instead of rewriting a prompt, I have given a creative direction how I picture the platform should look like, and the agent picks the model and runs the generation. After a few rounds of creative refinement and direction, we finally arrived at a station environment that felt right. The platform image captured the exact mood I was aiming for, and honestly, it looked even better than I had imagined. The lighting, atmosphere, and overall cinematic feel perfectly suited the story and became the visual foundation for the film. While the station environment was being developed, Agent 1 also proposed multiple variations of Thomas's announcement voice.
Good evening, passengers. The 8:15 train.
Good evening, passengers.
None of them felt quite right to me, so instead of settling, I gave more specific creative direction. I wanted the voice to sound like an authentic railway station announcement, warm, familiar, and believable.
Attention, please. The 7:45 evening service.
Based on that feedback, I selected the second voice model, named it Thomas, and saved it to the project. I also locked image 3.113 as the primary station environment. This is where the workflow becomes interesting. Once a location, character, or creative element is approved, it becomes part of the project context. Before generating the actual scenes, we're effectively completing the pre-production process, defining the environment, refining the characters, establishing the voice, and making key creative decisions. Much like traditional filmmaking, the set, cast, and visual language are established first, so production can move forward with a clear creative direction. Next, we move on to creating Eleanor and Thomas's photograph. Rather than repeatedly writing prompts, I'm directing the project while Agent 1 keeps track of the creative decisions that have already been made. While that's being generated, let me show you the Context tab. This is where Agent 1 stores its understanding of the treatment, including the narrative, characters, creative decisions, visual rules, and key aesthetic references. It also gives access to project assets and the notebook, where all generated media is organized. Here is Eleanor. The initial result is already quite close, but I feel her face looks a little too polished and AI-generated. Since the story takes place on a rainy evening, I also want her carrying an umbrella. Rather than starting over, I can simply direct those changes here. That's much better. The character now feels more natural and aligned with the film, so I'll go ahead and lock Eleanor for the project. What I like here is the ability to iterate quickly. Instead of starting from scratch whenever something feels off, I can make targeted adjustments and gradually refine each asset until it matches the look I'm after. Thomas looks exactly like he should. Without writing a single character prompt, it's ready. In the next step, the 3 beats are already broken down into individual shots, along with creative notes and post-production tasks that will be applied once the required footage has been generated. We can also create multiple agents to handle different responsibilities simultaneously. For example, I created a post-work agent to develop the station master character. It works alongside the primary director agent while sharing the same project context. What I found interesting here is that Agent 1 doesn't simply generate a character and move on. It starts asking relevant creative questions that help define the station master's personality, behavior, motivations, and relationship to the story. For example, did he know Thomas personally? How does he feel about the announcement being replaced? These details aren't just cosmetic. They influence how the character is portrayed on screen. This approach makes the character feel far more intentional and tailored to the story, rather than feeling like a generic AI-generated asset. To save credits, I asked Agent 1 to generate a 2x2 grid of the station master with different profile views. Although Nano Banana Pro was selected by default, we can choose the underlying model ourselves. And for character reference images like these, I found Nano Banana delivered the best results. Next, I asked Agent 1 to generate a keyframe for each shot. These keyframes act as a storyboard, helping visualize how each scene will play out before moving into full video generation. We now have Eleanor arriving at the station, close-ups of the announcement speaker, the station master, and the moment she looks at Thomas's photograph. However, this is where I encountered one of the main challenges during the project. As more keyframes were generated, including the seasonal transition sequence used to show the passage of time, I noticed that almost every frame was using the exact same platform composition. The station identity remained consistent, but the camera perspective wasn't changing enough from shot to shot. In a way, this happened because the locked platform reference was being respected very strongly. While that helped preserve continuity, it also meant that camera positioning sometimes became too rigid. For example, I wanted an over-the-shoulder shot of Eleanor holding Thomas's photograph. The shot was technically generated, but the surrounding platform framing remained almost unchanged. I had to spend time directing Agent 1 on how to separate environmental continuity from camera placement. The station, lighting, and architecture needed to remain consistent, while the framing and spatial orientation should change naturally based on camera position. To be fair, once I explained the issue, I was eventually able to get the results I wanted. But this was probably the area where I spent the most time iterating, and it consumed a fair amount of credits along the way. It's one of the few frustrations I encountered during the project, and I shared that feedback with the InVideo team as well. Once the keyframes, shot list, and scene sequence were finalized and locked, it was finally time to move into full video generation. For the first shot, I used image 8.6 as the opening frame and image 10.4 as the ending frame. Before generating videos, there is one setting worth mentioning. By default, generations are set to Always Allow, but I would recommend switching to Always Ask. This lets you review the shot plan before generation, which can help avoid unnecessary regenerations. Once the video was generated, I noticed some ghosting around the umbrella as it closed. I flagged the issue, regenerated the shot, and the second version turned out much cleaner. This is essentially the workflow throughout the project. Review the shot, approve it if it works, make adjustments if needed, and then move on to the next one. Everything remains organized within the project, so there is no need to manually save individual clips. Before each generation, Agent 1 presents a detailed breakdown of the shot, including the scene structure, subject, camera direction, lighting, style notes, and other production settings. I found this particularly useful because it provides visibility into how the shot is being interpreted before spending credits on generation. Once all the shots were completed, Agent 1 moved into assembling the final film. At this stage, I also reviewed and finalized the station announcement script that had been developed during the process. The title card was automatically generated and added to the beginning of the film, leaving me with a complete first cut. While the result was already quite strong, I still made a few final adjustments to transitions, pacing, and shot timing to better match the emotional rhythm of the story. Creating the announcement was an interesting experience, and despite a few challenges along the way, I was able to take a film from treatment to final video entirely within Agent 1. If you'd like to try it yourself, visit ai.invideo.io and check out Agent Mode.